G'day, negotiations, what is it? How does it work? Well, most people don't know how to negotiate. They don't even know the difference between negotiating and bargaining. And when I was trained to negotiate, I saved my company, not my own company, but the company I worked for, over $1.2 million simply by negotiating. And people think it's a negative thing, that you're somehow haggling, and it's not the same thing. Negotiation is enriching and offering win-win situations. And if you're up against someone who's a negotiator, that's a good news because you're both going to win out of it. And it's not something to be seen as a negative. Negotiation is a good thing. It's about win-wins. So we're going to get into that now. G'day. Are you a CEO looking to improve your performance? Or perhaps you want to be a CEO one day? Or do you even want to take charge of your own life and be a CEO for your own future? Well, we've got the channel for you because we talk about real life CEO experiences. So if that's of interest to you, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on all notifications. So let's get into it. So what is negotiation? Well, it's the planned approach to reaching beneficial outcomes where there's potential for conflict to occur. It's a formal definition, but what does it really mean? Well, you're sitting across the table for somebody in a business negotiation and they've got their needs and wants and you have yours. They don't necessarily perfectly align, but there is the potential that they could align. That's what negotiation is. Now, a lot of times I hear people treating negotiations more like haggling. So when is haggling different to negotiation or bargaining? Haggling or bargaining is what you might do if you were trying to get the price down on buying a one-off item. Let's say you go to the guy selling a hot dog and he says it's $1.50 and you only want to pay $1. You've really got nothing to bring to the table other than to negotiate on price. That's when it's haggling, okay? Now, negotiation does have an element of haggling in it, but it's a small part of it. Negotiation is a much broader issue, and it actually starts from the moment you begin to interact. In business, you're starting to negotiate as soon as you begin to talk. So in what situations would we typically be negotiating? Let's say, for example, you're into a job interview. Perhaps you're sitting across the table from someone talking to a client about a contract negotiation, or you're selling yourself into some kind of a role or something bigger and broader than maybe just a simple transaction. Some people say that life is a negotiation, and I would say negotiation is a key skill for life, but I wouldn't say life is a negotiation. I believe in friends and seeking life with some basis of values, and those don't necessarily fit with negotiation. Negotiation is a very handy tool that can be used in many, many applications, including private life. And we can talk about some examples there where it might help you in your private life. But let's talk more about business and how they can help you. And by way of example, I was fortunate enough to be sent on a specific negotiation course, which took me to Hong Kong, and I spent 3 days being taught by people who negotiated. And one of the things that they mentioned very early on is that it's not about haggling. It's not about just pitching your price and they say, no, that price isn't good enough, and back and forward. It's a much broader and richer discussion. It's about bringing things into the cake, as they would say, enriching the cake, adding not just the flour and the sugar, but adding in some fruits and some icing, making the cake more and bigger than otherwise it would be. And shortly after I'd finished the training, I walked into a negotiation where I was leading my team, and a vendor came in proposing that we purchase for the tune of $1.2 million a design that they had created. It seemed like a lot of money, but we were getting pressured from our management to make the deal work. Now, rather than just handing over the $1.2 million, we realized that the company on the other side of the table was after something else that wasn't just cash. What they really wanted was an opportunity to do the manufacturing for that particular product. So instead of spending $1.2 million and buying the concept or the product design, we offered them a manufacturing opportunity, provided that we would get through initial design sets of criteria and the other things that needed to happen internal within the process. And as it turned out, we weren't able to complete the due diligence that was required of us, and therefore we never went ahead with the production. Why I tell that story is that had we not opened up the doorway to this new opportunity with operations and giving that company the manufacturing, then we never would have been able to hold back that $1.2 million to go through the due diligence and ultimately save the company a lot of money. And this is the power of negotiations, is to give them what they want, but on your terms. And what they wanted was manufacturing. On our terms was to get through the due diligence. We successfully achieved that, and we never went ahead with the product and saved ourselves lots of money. So negotiations are very powerful because they help to avoid conflict. So where are some of the conflicts and where can they occur? So one of the main conflict areas is that we try to persuade, and we may not be able to persuade the other person. Another one might be to postpone the conflict or avoid the conflict, but of course that doesn't really bring anything into resolution. You could completely give in to the other party, or of course you're not going to get what you want by giving in. Unilateral action, which is kind of the opposite, we just go your own way and do your own thing regardless of the consequences, and that damages relationships. Problem solving. Okay, so what if the other party doesn't see the same problem that you see, right? So that's not helping either. Haggling, we talked a little bit about that before. That's when you might be talking about price and you just can't get the prices to come together. And you could always bring in someone to arbitrate, a third party, but the problem is you're giving power over to that third person, and that may not go in your favor. So what is negotiation? Well, it's giving in areas of lesser importance to gain in areas of greater importance. And that's the art of the negotiation. So there's many aspects to it. You want to bring them in, and it's a discussion, and it's important to flesh them out and understand where the other person's priorities are versus yours. One simple way to understand where the negotiation area is to think about it as a kind of graph where you have limits at one end, or your ideal at one end, and your call a limit at the other end. In other words, you've got your ideal, your wish list, all the way down to the things where you're going to start to say, well, after that point, I'm going to walk away. And the other party is going to have the same things. They're going to have their ideal and their limit. And so good negotiators go into a negotiation understanding where their wish list is, their ideal is, and where their limits are. And when there's a crossover between those two limits is where you can negotiate. That's called the negotiating area. There's a process to negotiating, and it can start very early. I believe in starting a negotiation before I've even met the other party, because I need to prepare myself and try to understand a little bit about them and what I want from the whole exchange. So the first thing is, of course, to prepare, and that's your research. That's your thinking about what your ideal are, what your limits are. And the second thing, of course, when you go into the discussion, you're going to discuss things. So you're going to talk about, why you're here, what you're trying to achieve, and give some background to both parties. That's discussing. Through that, or at least towards the end of that, you need to signal. And signaling is very important, and one of the biggest areas where people fail in negotiations. They don't signal clearly the direction that they want to go and what's important to them. And we used to, in the training, call that the big BS detector, because people would often signal things that really weren't the important things to them. They felt that they needed to negotiate perhaps on price, when actually the price wasn't the most important thing. Maybe it was the timing or the terms of the contract or the length, the duration, those sorts of things. So signaling exactly what it is that you're after without necessarily having to state it or drive it in, just signaling directions is a really important part of the discussions. Propose. So we've done some discussions, we've both signaled. The power is in the proposal, is what we used to say. Proposing what you want to do is a good way to get what you want. The power is in the proposal. Putting a proposal forward gives the other party an opportunity to join with you in that proposal, to contribute or to show objections to that proposal. So a proposal might be something like, well, I'll deliver the product within the next 30 days, provided you make a 50% deposit today, and some other aspects of the specification. That might be your proposal. And that gives it gives you a basis to work from. So that's a proposal. What's going to happen after a proposal? Well, there's going to be some discussion around packaging it up. Like, what are all the aspects of it and how are they all tied together? So we named 3, but there's probably other issues about the quality controls and the specifications and things like that, which we'll want to package up and say, well, this is what it is. Is that what it is? In our packaging process, we're going to get things pulled in and out. And what is that? That's called trading or bargaining. So one key way of trading and bargaining is to use the if. So for example, if you agree to the 50% deposit, then we will deliver in 20 days. So we always put the if first, because in the other person's mind, then they get a chance to digest that and realize that that's a precondition on the next thing. You don't say what you're going to offer first. You always say what you expect in return first. So again, if you do something, then I will do something. That's a key way of trading. Once you've traded and everything's settled, it's a question of closing. And closing is just really bringing it all together. So we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And then we agree. And that can simply be, a handshake across the table or a nod or something that you use to close out and to agree. And you might want to put something in writing or at least in an email. So those are the 8 steps. One of the key aspects of negotiating is understanding where the power is in the relationship. Sometimes it's very obvious that one party has a lot more power than others, but sometimes it's a little more subtle and it's very important. Let's take an example where company A is a small company going to try and win the business of a very large company. Now, it may seem that the large company has a lot of power, but what may not be known is to what extent they need the small company. For example, they may have some key intellectual property that they cannot get anywhere else, and they really need it for their product line. And if they don't get it, it could cost them many, many millions of dollars. Understanding the power in the relationship is really powerful for negotiating, because you want to make sure you do the best thing for you and your company. And understanding what power you have in that relationship and what power they have in the relationship can really help you be successful in getting good terms. One really important technique is to use adjournments or pauses or breaks in the meeting. Sometimes it's important that you regroup your team and to discuss the pros and against, and there's no reason why you can't ask for an adjournment. 5 minutes, let's get a coffee, stretch our legs. I'm going to talk to my team and we'll come back and see where we go. I've used this technique many times and it's been very, very helpful to me to rally my team. So, when negotiating, should you be with a team or as an individual? And if you have a team, how do you organize? I always try to bring other members of my team into a negotiation. It gives you another set of eyes and ears to gauge what's happening on the other side of the table. So, for example, it's often just me and one other, but ideally you would have 3 people. You have a leader, you have a summarizer, and you have another third person or an observer. Of course, the leader is generally doing most of the work. They are interpreting what needs to be done, and they're the ones that make the proposal. There can only be one leader in the group. Otherwise, there's a risk of 2 people making proposals and confusing the other party or proposing things that may be above and beyond which is really actually necessary to close the deal. So one person has the power to make proposals. The second person is summarizing, and that's really powerful for taking what's just transpired and repackaging it and restating it so everyone knows where they're at. And the third person is observer, generally silent. Now, this is actually more important than is given credit for. Things like body language and eye contact, those sorts of things, very hard to pick up when you are on the spot as the leader, trying to think through the arguments and make your presentation. Summarizer and a observer can witness the behavior and see how people react to various parts of your presentation. Say, for example, you're talking about one particular specification aspect of your product, and all of a sudden there's a wink and a nod going between two people on the other side of the table. That means that's kind of important to them. So watching the body language as things unfold is really helpful in understanding how the negotiation should transpire. Many times it's actually not possible to have a group and you're working on your own, and I have to do things in video, and that's all okay. Take your time, don't rush a negotiation, take as long as you want, and take on those roles of summarizing and observing and asking clear questions, and slow the whole thing down so that you can really digest the situation. Some of the common mistakes that are made when negotiating. Well, number one, and it's easiest to fix, is preparation. Not understanding what your own priorities are and what the customer might be bringing to the table. Number two, not discussing well or arguing to win is another big mistake. There's no point winning an argument and losing the negotiation. So arguing to win is not something negotiation should be about. Signaling or punishing signals. So when your opposite party says, oh, we're looking for very low prices, you don't come back and start arguing about price. You understand what their signals are, and they may have many, many things that they want, and you recognize each of those signals as something that help the negotiation. You want to promote and help that, not punish that. Unrealistic proposals. We talked about the power of the proposal, but importantly is having a realistic proposal. Having an unrealistic proposal just puts things so far away that people can't bring the negotiation back. So make a realistic proposal. Packaging. Not valuing the concessions that you've made. In other words, you may have made several concessions. They all need to be stated when you package the product so that it's known what you're conceding to in order to get what you want. Giving away shark bait. So imagine you're in the water and the shark comes up to you. You throw it a small fish. It's going to eat the fish. Then what's it going to do? It's going to come back for more. So it's this whole shark bait thing. Don't throw out shark bait. Every time you give a concession, you make sure you get something back in return. A very, very big mistake that's made. People think that by throwing out concessions, they're going to win the deal. Making concessions is important, but they need to be traded. Not seeing the closing opportunity. When it's time to close, there's no point negotiating. There's no point overselling. Have you ever been with someone that sold something to you and they just keep selling? Every step after that is just making the deal worse for them. More likely to lose the deal by overselling. So once it's time to close, just close the deal and move on. Distorting the deal after the agreement. This is really a great way to damage a relationship and a negotiation. Is the deal package is done and then coming back and saying, oh, I forgot so and so and so, we have to get that back in, or flicking it up to somebody else and then they come back with their own set of requirements. If that happens to you and you're receiving of that, it's really back to the drawing board. Oh, okay, let's enter into it. Can we discuss that next week? Let's enter into the negotiations again, or rediscuss the whole thing. It really comes right back to the first thing I said. Good preparation results in a good close and no reason for opening up discussions afterwards. So that's all about negotiation. I hope that's helpful for you. And please stay tuned for more episodes on the CEO Experience. And thanks for watching.